Change Performance Index or CCPI for the first time. As Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar puts it, India is walking the talk by cutting down emission intensity by 21% of its GDP. Moreover, it's on track to achieve the goal of 35% emission reduction as promised in Paris Agreement in the year 2015. More commendable is the fact that while India has stayed true to its commitment on reducing its carbon footprint, advanced nations like the United States have been included in the worst performing countries for the first time. Even rich nations like Australia and Saudi Arabia, which are running their economies on the basis of coal industries, are also among the countries with high carbon emissions. The CCPI report was released at COP25 Climate Change Conference in Spanish capital, Madrid. In Depth Today tracks India's performance in the arena of climate change, managing to stay on track at a time when many 8 G20 countries are at the bottom of the list due to very low performance in key categories. Well, the latest Climate Change Performance Index report yet again indicates that countries are not doing enough to prevent climate change. 8 G20 countries find themselves at the bottom of the list due to very low performance in key categories. The United States has emerged as worst performing country. The top 3 of CCPI are unoccupied, because none of the countries are clearly on a well below 2 degrees Celsius pathway in their overall performance. India, however, has improved its ranking, but a lot more needs to be done. Take a look.
The latest Climate Change Performance Index shows signs of a global turnaround in emissions, including declining coal consumption. However, the report launched at the UN Climate Conference COP25 in Madrid points out that several large countries are still not working hard enough to tackle climate change. According to the report, Australia, Saudi Arabia and especially the US give cause for great concern with their low to very low performance in emissions, renewable energy development and climate policy.
The key issues that are being discussed are the rules about carbon markets, about internationally trading carbon credits, that is, the rules and the framework for addressing loss and damage, other issues addressing the loss and damage due to climate change and facilitating finance for countries which are disproportionately affected by climate states, especially small island nations and countries of that sort. And there is increasing pressure on countries to set a date by which their carbon emissions will reach net zero, that remove as much carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as we emit through either trees or some other technological means.
Interestingly and unfortunately, no country succeeded in achieving all the requirements to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius as agreed to in the Paris Agreement. This is why the first 3 places in the final ranking remain unoccupied. In the latest index, Sweden led the ranking, followed by Denmark and Morocco. Chinese Taipei, Saudi Arabia and the USA round up the bottom of the rankings. China, the largest global emitter, is at number 30 in the index. With a score of 66.02, India is ranked 9th in the Climate Change Performance Index, the first time the country has ranked among the top 10. The current levels of per capita emissions and energy use in India are still comparatively low. Along with that, the ambitious 2030 targets have resulted in high ratings for our country in greenhouse gas emissions and energy use categories. The authors of the report noted that while India received an overall medium rating in the renewable energy category, India's 2030 renewable energy target is rated very high for its well below 2 degrees Celsius compatibility. However, despite an overall high rating, experts point out that India has yet to develop a roadmap to phase out fossil fuel subsidies that would consequently reduce the country's high dependence on coal.
The carbon emissions that we talk of, India as a country has reduced from 35% of what we thought we would be able to, and we brought it down to 21. So it is quite a promising future that I see, that environment as a whole is now coming to the forefront in India. Besides, I think a lot of work has been done in renewable energy, how to recycle waste management, and on ban of single-use plastic. So all these are environmental steps that Indian ministry is taking.
Published annually since 2005, the Climate Change Performance Index is prepared by a group of international think tanks. It is an independent monitoring tool for tracking countries' climate protection performance with an aim to enhance transparency in international climate politics, thereby enabling comparison of climate protection efforts and the progress made by individual countries. On the basis of standardized criteria, the CCPI currently evaluates and compares the climate protection performance of 57 countries and of the European Union, which are together responsible for more than 90% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions. The four categories assessed are GHG emissions, renewable energy, energy use, and climate policy. Increasing public awareness and a growing global climate movement is putting pressure on governments to make climate policy a priority, but only a few countries have started working towards limiting global warming. The Climate Change Performance Index indicates which industrial countries are in the lead and which are the biggest losers. The assessment shows once again that the biggest climate polluters are hardly doing anything to curtail irreversible damage to the climate. Climate change is real and it is a race against time. The problems are multifaceted and must be matched by multidimensional solutions in the global fight to save the planet. All before it's too late. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, India showcased its commitment to tackling climate change at UN Climate Conference COP25 in Madrid. Delivering India's statement at the conference, Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar insisted that India is walking the talk and is providing an action plan to tackle climate change. India has also expressed concern over developed countries not fulfilling their goals.
India is walking the talk on its climate change commitments. Reducing its emissions intensity by 21% of its GDP, India is getting closer to achieving its goal of 35% emissions reduction as promised in the Paris Summit in 2015. Speaking at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change COP25 in Madrid, Minister for Environment, Forests and Climate Change Prakash Javadekar asserted that India is providing a convenient action plan to tackle climate change.
We have already given our nationally determined contributions and we are progressing on all that. It's only 3-4 countries which are really progressing very well in completing the programs and promises given in Paris. So we have already 21% of reduction in emission intensity. We'll achieve our 35% goal. We have created this renewable mix of 40% in our energy capacity. At the same time, we have taken a target of creating 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon equivalent, in which we have already generated last 5 years 13,000 square kilometers of green cover. Within forest and outside forest, tree cover has increased, and we are creating carbon sink everywhere. So we are growing in the right direction, and this land degradation, all efforts put together, India will overdo what it has promised, and more importantly, it will outperform itself. We are competing with ourselves.
The Environment Minister also noted that India is probably one of the few countries where green cover is increasing. Speaking at the summit, Javadekar urged the world economies to concentrate on implementing the Paris Climate Pact. India also advocated the need for more countries to join the International Solar Alliance that was launched by Prime Minister Narendra Modi and then French President François Hollande in 2015.
Solar energy, India committed 175 gigawatt of renewable energy, out of which 100 gigawatt was solar. And I'm happy to report when Prime Minister made this announcement, India had only 3 gigawatt of solar energy. Today we have 33 gigawatts. And in next 3 years, we'll create that 67 gigawatt also. So to make it 100 and 175 gigawatt will be achieved in time. At the same time, now he has upscaled the target to 450 gigawatts. This is not raising ambition. This is doing good things in more efficiently. And therefore, this is our own way of how India wants to be very serious, because we want to have 40% of our energy capacity mix through renewables.
Expressing concern over lack of finances from developed nations for the cause, Javadekar said that not even 2% of the promised $1 trillion support has materialized in the last 10 years. He said that it was time for the developed world that grew on the carbon emissions scale to deliver on its promises, lamenting that their NDCs or nationally determined contributions did not reflect ambition. At the climate conference, questions are being raised on the seeming reluctance of developed countries towards meeting Paris Agreement goals. Australia, Singapore, Japan, and the United States said they will not update their nationally determined contributions. 51% of all NDCs have included carbon markets and emissions trading mechanism as one of the ways of emission reduction. Developed countries have also not delivered on their pre-2020 commitments. These include mobilizing $100 billion per year by 2020 to help developing nations in their efforts to mitigate the climate change crisis. The United States has already begun the year-long process of withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. However, representing the US at the conference, Democratic presidential candidate Michael Bloomberg vowed to immediately rejoin the pact if elected president. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, the Global Climate Risk Index 2020 that was released last week stating that India was 5th most climate-affected country in 2018. As per the report, extreme weather events are massive challenges not just for poor and vulnerable countries, but also for high-income countries. In the last 2 decades, globally, nearly 500,000 fatalities were directly linked to more than 12,000 extreme weather events, the economic damages of which amounted to approximately $3.54 trillion. India alone incurred losses worth $38,000 million approximately.
India is the 5th most vulnerable country when it comes to climate change, according to the Global Climate Risk Index 2020, released by environmental think tank German Watch. India, in fact, fell from the 15th rank of countries hit by climate change-induced weather phenomena in 2017. The country recorded the highest number of deaths due to climate change and the second highest monetary losses in the year 2018. The report says India's increasing vulnerability is due to severe rainfall, heavy flooding and landslides that claimed hundreds of lives across the country. It says that in 2018, the southwest monsoon severely affected the country. Kerala was specially impacted, where 324 people died due to floods, the worst in 100 years. Over 220,000 people had to leave their homes, 20,000 houses and 80 dams were destroyed. The damage amounted to $2.8 billion. Furthermore, the Indian coast was hit by cyclones Titli and Gaja in October and November 2018. With wind speeds of up to 150 kilometers per hour, Cyclone Titli killed 8 people and left around 450,000 without electricity. Besides, the country also suffered from extreme heat in the year 2018. Although the human death toll was kept considerably low due to public measures, the economic damages were quite severe as per the report.
India, to my mind, becomes more vulnerable because of what I call poverty overpopulation. We are not only overpopulated, but among that overpopulated, demography, you have more poor people. So if you have more poor people in that, in the population, then they become more vulnerable. And vulnerability is a function of these two things. population versus environmental extreme. If environmental extreme is in a place where there is no human population, that extreme may come and go. That may impact other forms of life or something like that. But when these environmental extremes hit areas where there is more human population, there will be more deaths responses.
The report assessed 181 countries and quantified impacts of climate change through economic losses, losses to GDP, and fatalities to arrive at a ranking. It shows that extreme weather linked with climate change is not only affecting poorer countries but also some of the world's richest countries. Japan was the worst hit in 2018, followed by the Philippines, Germany, Madagascar, and India. Sri Lanka, Kenya, Rwanda, Canada, and Fiji were also among the bottom 10 in the global vulnerability ladder. Other countries in the bottom 20 were the United States of America, Vietnam, Bangladesh, and France at 12th, 6th, 7th, and 15th places respectively. The results reflect the increasing damage caused by heat waves that scientists say are being worsened by climate change.
While these reports lay down the kind of threat that climate change causes to these countries, there are two major kind of losses that the countries incur. One is an economic loss, the other one is a human loss. We see from the report that the economic loss is majorly on the rich countries, for obvious reason. They have high GDPs. But the human loss is skewed towards middle income and low income countries, primarily because of prevalent differential vulnerabilities and inequalities. The low and middle income countries and developing countries like ours need access to low cost finance. Finance to be used for sensitization of vulnerable communities, to look at low cost solutions.
The Climate Risk Index is based on data from the Munich Re-NatCat service, one of the largest databases on natural catastrophes. It has another set of ranking for 1999 to 2018, based on average values over a 20-year period. In the 1999 to 2018 period, Puerto Rico was the most vulnerable, followed by Myanmar, Haiti, Philippines, and Pakistan. India is ranked 17th under long-term vulnerability. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
But the world's governments have come together with an ambitious agenda to transform our planet Earth by adopting the Sustainable Development Goals, which aims to ensure that no one is left behind and everyone benefits from development efforts. In that effort, India is leaving no stone unturned in realizing its commitment to the goals.
Having played an important role in shaping the Sustainable Development Goals, it is not a surprise that India's own national development goals are reflective of them. In order to fulfill the SDG agenda, the government launched many programs focused on eliminating poverty, gender inequality, climate change, and resource mobilization for SDGs. There is no time to lose in implementing these programs, for India's natural ecosystems are under a lot of stress. 10% of its wildlife is threatened with extinction. Agricultural biodiversity has declined over 90% in many regions. Over half the available water bodies are polluted beyond drinking and often beyond even agricultural use. 2/3 of the land is degraded to suboptimal productivity. Air pollution in several cities is amongst the world's worst, and modern waste, including electronic and chemical waste, are being produced at rates far exceeding our capacity to recycle or manage. UN member states adopted the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which includes 17 Sustainable Development Goals to end poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and tackle climate change by 2030. The government has time and again reiterated its commitment to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. With the highest densities of economic activity in the world and a large number of the population relying on the natural resource base for their livelihood, India is one of those nations most vulnerable to climate change. One of the most significant ways that climate change will impact India will be through its water resources. While water sustains life, it all too often wreaks havoc through devastating floods and droughts. A changing climate will only aggravate these shocks. India's leadership on climate change has been evident and well recognized across the globe. The government has undertaken several initiatives to address climate change concerns, and these initiatives reflect India's commitment and ambition towards climate action. In the recently held Climate Action Summit convened by the United Nations Secretary General, the Prime Minister announced India's plan to scale up its renewable energy target to 450 gigawatts and called for responsible action by all on the principles of equity and CBDRRC.
The time for talking is over. The world needs to act now. We believe that an ounce of practice is worth more than a ton of preaching. हम भारत में के फ्यूल मिक्स में नॉन फॉसिल फ्यूल की हिस्सेदारी बढ़ा रहे हैं। हम 2022 तक रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी में अपनी कैपेसिटी को 175 गीगावाट तक ले जा रहे हैं और आगे हम इसे 450 गीगावाट तक ले जाने के लिए प्रतिबद्ध है।
Our Prime Minister recently at the UN Climate Action Summit launched the Coalition on Disaster Resilient Infrastructure, which is a great way forward to enhance collaboration and come out of the silo approach that we have and get the academia, the governments, the think tanks, civil societies and the industry come together to make the right kind of and the sustainable kind of choices.
In a big push towards renewable energy, India has established the International Solar Alliance along with France in 2018. The initiative to establish ISA took place at the 2015 Paris Climate Convention. The initiative reflected the need for a cohesive and robust global body which could meet the twin goals of adaptation as well as integration of energy resources along with climate change. India has also ratified the Paris Climate Agreement that seeks to limit the Earth's warming to below 2 degrees Celsius. Even though India has not agreed to cap emissions like other developing nations, Prime Minister Modi did pledge to bulk up on renewable power and reduce emissions relative to GDP by roughly a third from 2005's emissions by 2030. A large part of India's energy comes from coal, with renewables making up only 3%. The International Energy Agency says that the country is second only to China in terms of coal production and the largest importer of coal before 2020. That's why India's pledge to invest $100 billion in clean energy over the next 5 years is significant. So why is India at the forefront of climate action even though the responsibility ought to lie with the biggest polluters? Well, that's because the most affected must be willing to act first. Globally, climate action has been mitigation-centric, with most programs aimed at slowing down future global warming. However, one has to understand that mitigation is more important to developed countries, and for countries like India, the focus should be on adaptation. So, how are we adapting? With greater number of floods and droughts, there is also an increased need for interlinking of rivers, and the Modi government has always favored this. Now it must see it as going beyond water security and in the light of climate action. Another adaptive measure is genetically modified crops, which is a major component of climate-smart agriculture. Drought-resistant crops and crops that produce more on the same patch of land are the need of the hour. There is skepticism surrounding genetically modified crops, but the technology has been in use globally for over 2 decades, so India must adapt. The government's Ujjwala Yojana is also a big step in the fight against climate change, as it has replaced conventional wood-burning stoves with the more efficient gas stoves. India accounts for just 4.5% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions, but is at a higher risk of flooding and high temperatures. That is why the country has a greater incentive to slow global warming. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, that's it from us today in depth. We'll be back.